Welcome to the latest of my deep dive videos. Today I'm going to explore the journey of Venus through the sign of Aries, which begins on the 4th of February at 7:57 a.m. Universal. Now Venus usually takes around about 28 days to transit through each zodiac sign. But this particular Venus season is going to last 18 weeks, right through to the 6th of June. But it is quite complex because, of course, we are going to have the retrograde. We're going to have an initial 26 days of Venus direct in Aries, a sign which it is detrimented in, so that does have its own complexities. But then we're going to have 17 days of Venus inverting back into the sign of Pisces. The total retrograde is 42 days. The total time Venus is travelling forwards around about 42 days as well. We're also going to see Venus eventually emerge from its post-shadow period in the middle of May. So a lot to share with you. Venus is very much to do with our desires, but it can also be to do with our self-worth, our values, and money. But in terms of its more Libran energy, it is of course about how we relate, how we present things. It can be about harmony, but it can be our appreciation of our interior design and how we dress as much as anything else. But in the sign of Aries, Venus, as I mentioned, is detrimented because Venus rules the sign opposite Aries of Libra. And the sign of Aries is ruled by Mars. So we're talking about very contrasting energies. But I like Venus in Aries. It's a can-do energy. It's a very enlivening energy. And as it starts this process, it's forging a karmic link, not just to Pluto, which it's going to repeat a further 2 times. It's also extremely close to the North Node and the point of destiny. And you may have had a connection very, very recently that has been extremely vivid for you. Or your appreciation of your artistic or creative talents may have been heightened. But because Neptune can be a shimmering influence, it can also in some ways distort. And as much as something can seem absolutely amazing, helping us to trip the light fantastic, it can also trip us up. So I'm going to unpack all of this for you. I'm going to share the key aspects that Venus forges. As I mentioned, it is going to have 3 contacts with Pluto, but all through May, it's going to be in a conjunction with Saturn once it is back in the sign of Pisces, and that is a very challenging aspect indeed. But you know, it's really interesting because when we get to the start of June, preparing to move into the sign of Taurus, which obviously Venus is very happy to be in because it is the sole domiciliary ruler, Venus is going to forge on the early days of June a glorious link to the planet of fortune, Jupiter. And of course Venus is known as the lesser benefit. So if we really stick in there, if there is a plan, an idea, perhaps an enterprising idea we have, or it is a relationship that we've really been captivated by, there may be some challenges ahead, there may be some cross wires, but if we really want something and we're prepared to work at it, Saturn, there could be an outcome at the end of the process which is truly magical. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundell. I'm going to talk you through the themes of Venus. It rules 2 zodiac signs, of course, and then what we can expect in Aries, particularly for those initial first 26 days. I'm going to share the event charts, the solar event chart, which helps us to all collectively relate to this event, but also the natal event chart based on universal time and also Greenwich because of the prime meridian. And that shows an ascendant in the sign of Aquarius, but that clashes with Uranus domiciled in Taurus, which Venus rules. We also have, as this event begins, the moon in the sign of Taurus, where she loves to be. She's exalted, but she's clashing with Pluto. So those are really interesting subtext to this big story that occurs every 18 months. Venus goes retrograde. Please stay with me as I go through this. I'm then going to share with you a flavour of what you can expect in terms of your ascendant, sun or the moon in relation to your zodiac sign from Aries through to Pisces. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundell. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate all your interaction, your support and your views. If you're new here, this is very much a community. Please do share any thoughts you have. If you've yet to sub, please help the channel to thrive. Click that subscription button, but also the bell notification symbol. I have launched my new website. It is a work in process. The old one had been up for 21 years, so it's taken us a while to refine it, but please do check it out at www.patrickarundell.com. If you'd like to work with me personally, please see my testimonials below. My one-to-one readings is a very enriching part of what I do to help people. But also I'm offering another way of connecting with me through my video readings. Please see the link below for those. You can ask 2 questions. I can analyse your solar return if it's upcoming with your birthday, or I can look at your year ahead using all the different techniques that I deploy, which is through obviously the natal, the transits, but also progress charts, directed charts, perfections. I use quite a few different ways of looking at things, and of course in terms of solar return via the natal chart. Please see the links below for more. And finally, to celebrate that new website, you can get my printed reports emailed to you through my special package below at 50% off through to the end of February. Please check out those too. So Venus moves into Aries for 18 weeks on the 4th of February. Of course, the other big event today is that Jupiter goes direct. Please check out my deep dive for that if you've yet to view it. So Venus retrograde, as I mentioned, is around about every 18 months. It's going to start the process with a near full period of ingress of 26 days, but then after that we're going to have, after the 26 days of direct, we get 26 days of retrograde in the sign of Aries, but we also get 17 days back in the sign of Pisces. And of course Venus is exalted in Pisces, it loves to be there, and is just emerging from a quite magical alliance to the position of Neptune and the North Node, which may have created some kind of mystique or massive connection to someone or something. If you're someone who has a particular appreciation of art or film, that appreciation will have been turned up to an exquisite high octave over the last week or so. So the total retrograde is 42 days, but it's going to emerge from shadow on the 16th of May. So even once the retrograde ends, we've still got that period to go through. So Venus retrograde begins on March the 2nd, 10 degrees and 50 minutes in Aries. It inverts into Pisces on the 27th of March, but the retrograde ends on April the 13th at 24 degrees and 10 minutes. So Venus returns back into Aries on April the 30th, but it will connect with Neptune, but this time in Aries, because Neptune moves into Aries at the end of March. And then it's going to be in Aries through to the 6th of June, as I mentioned before. So Venus is the ruler, the prime or sole domiciliary ruler of both of the signs of Taurus and Libra. But Venus in Aries is really interesting because Venus, of course, can, through its rulership of Taurus, be very much an appreciation of sensuality, touch. It's earthy. Anything to do with agriculture is ruled by Taurus. So our love of good food, good wine can certainly glow up. But also it's about how we value ourselves, our self-worth, our personal values, very Venusian, but it can also be to do, of course, with more intimate sensuality. But Venus's rulership of Libra is very different. It's much more to do with relating. And that's where Venus in Aries becomes in detriment, because it's opposite the sign of Libra. And the sign of Aries, ruled by the feisty Mars, is about action, assertion, desire, making things happen in a very, very quick way. It's not about hanging around. Whereas Venus in Libra is about trying to find harmonies, meeting a situation in a way that creates a pleasantness. So it's great for presentation. It can be very much linked to fashion, interior design. But it can also, Venus, through its rulership of Libra, be a little bit superficial. And that's an interesting thing to remember. But in the sign of Aries, people who have it natally can have sparkling personalities. They can be initiators, because that's what Aries is about. Hugely enthusiastic. You know, I always feel that if people have Venus in Aries, if they do meet someone they like, they're much more likely to take the initiative. Now, of course, this event encapsulates Valentine's Day on the 14th of February. So if there is somebody that you're drawn towards, Venus in Aries is kind of saying, look, if you don't ask the question of whether they'd like to go out on that date, you're never going to know what the answer is. So sometimes Venus in Aries energy can push us to step outside our comfort zone and enjoy the thrill of the chase. So why not be passionate? Why not be a bit more impulsive? It's excellent to give ourselves some kind of dynamic makeover, because the first house is about our personal identity. The problem is if Venus is afflicted. But on this particular event, as I will share shortly, Venus has a quite karmic link, not just with Pluto, but in a disassociate way, still with Neptune and the North Node. Chart from a Placidus viewpoint, based on the prime meridian and Greenwich. So I feel that everyone can take something from this. Guess what? The ascendant is in the friendly Aquarius. But guess what? It's in an exact right angle with this disruptive modern ruler of Aquarius, Uranus. So if a relationship feels cramped or unsettled, that unsettledness is not necessarily going to make way just because Venus forges a magical link to Neptune and the North Node, potentially. And it is a bit of a dichotomy. It can be magical, or it can be a complete misrepresentation of someone's affection. So if there is somebody that's showing up for you that you're really drawn to, but you're not quite sure about them, do keep a little bit back. However, it does mean that Aries, the host, the first sign of the zodiac, is actually the first house too. There's an intersection. You can see that the gap between the first house cusp at 24 degrees Aries and the second house cusp is actually 60 degrees. So that's a very big first house, and it is where Venus is. So it's about that new beginning, but ironically Pluto's in the 12th house. So even if we are drawn to someone new, we need to be aware of what their deeper motive may be. So that's a flavour of what I think we can expect with Venus in Aries. And Venus in Pisces, as it returns into Pisces, maybe philosophically we could find ourselves thinking about how we relate. Are there lessons from the past that we could weave into our existing approach to all sorts of relationships? What are our values? Are we demonstrating enough self-belief and confidence in our individuality? Venus could push us to strut our stuff in a more self-assured way. That could be a really good thing. But I want to share with you now the aspects that are going to come up. Now, the initial one is that link with Pluto, and I feel that that can be very fated because it's going to be repeated 3 times. But if you are in a connection with someone and it's going well, it really can feel baked in. with Venus and Pluto in an excellent link like that. When Venus and Pluto are in an opposition, particularly, or perhaps a square, you can often see a lot of leverage, but the leverage comes through charm. Remember what I said about Venus can be a little bit superficial through its rulership of Libra. So whether it's a job, oh, we've got this job for you, it's, you know, it's absolutely right for you, and you get promised all these different terms and conditions that seem to be absolutely brilliant, and then when the reality strikes, the mist clears, they're not offering all of that at all, because usually with Pluto it can be about control, power and leverage, and Venus is used as a synthetic mask for the true motivation of that person. So if you do encounter anyone who does seem to be a little bit too good to be true, whether it is a business or work offer, or it is to do with a relationship, just bear that in mind. But essentially the sextile is much more enabling, and I think it's just making us much more aware through Venus's whole journey, even when it reverses back into Pisces, of who we can really feel that connection to in a deep way. But that the other upcoming aspect, is Venus is going to repeat the conjunction with Neptune that it's just coming out of from the 24th of March to the 31st of March, and it is exact. So that could be a time when again somebody quite mystical or very alluring shows up in our world, and we could get really caught up in that. But as I mentioned, Venus does repeat that sextile to Pluto. It happens again on March the 21st and also again on May the 6th. But the real biggie of this whole transit is the conjunction with Saturn. It goes on from the 1st to the 20th of April. It goes on all through April, but it's exact on the 7th, but also on the 25th. The reason for the repetition is the retrograde. What is Venus conjunct Saturn? If you recall, I've just mentioned what that was like in Pisces, and what we're getting here is, if you like, the second and third repetitions of what we had a couple of weeks ago. Because Saturn in Pisces can stir up those deep issues, if there is a relationship which isn't working very well, it really will become much more obvious across those dates. And it may be, because Saturn can be about work, it can be about structures, of course, it may be that despite people trying to collaborate and cooperate in a professional way, if there are real differences over values or money, they could show up all through April in a big way. But then Venus repeats the conjunction with Neptune again the first week of May and exactly on the 2nd. But then, as I mentioned, we do have the emergence of Venus from the sign of Aries and that fantastic link with Jupiter. So the two planets of fortune pay off for us exactly on June the 6th, and that can be something that we can really look forward to before Venus then returns home to the sign of Taurus. And for some people, particularly if you're a creative, even if you find that there are some frustrations over this 84 days, if you really stick at it and persist, it could be a time when actually you can be inspired in a way like never before. You know, Neptune can be an asset. It can be very dissolving as well. So Venus conjunct Neptune could dissolve a relationship, but it could bring a different, more mystical way of looking at how we relate collectively, a higher consciousness. But I feel that if you are someone who's more entrepreneurial and you're testing out a new idea which is more creative with Venus in Aries, you're going to get your reward if you're really tenacious by the start of the second week of June, and it could be quite a substantial reward too. Please stay with me as I go through each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces to give you a flavour of what you can expect. I would just say, some people do ask me, what do I watch, the ascendant, the sun or the moon? If you know your natal chart well, and not just your ascendant but your house overlays, you'll know exactly where the impact of planets moving is being felt the most. So the ascendant is always very important if you're that familiar. However, even people who are really into astrology and know their charts inside out still can look at the sun, because the sun is very important. It's the heart of who we are in terms of the furnace that comes from the sun to drive us on. It's very much about our ego in a way, so why should we ignore it? And it is something of a habit for people into astrology to be a bit dismissive of the sun. But the sun is critically important, and of course what house it's in as well, that too is really essential to know. So you can check out your ascendant, check out your sun. You can look at your moon if you want to know the more emotional dimension of what's going on in your situation. Also, if you've yet to watch your deep dive for February 2025, please see the link below for those videos too. So Aries, the one thing I can say to you that you can definitely do as Venus moves into your sign is give your personal presentation a makeover. Now, you may be a dedicated follower in fashion and feel that you're absolutely dialed in to the latest trend, and that could be absolutely so. But Venus in Aries is asking you to perhaps think a little bit more individually, to add some touches that may be perhaps more unique from what's going on more generally as far as fashion is concerned. But equally, if there is something that you've been thinking about, and it may relate to a talent that you've had in the past that have not had the time to grapple with more recently, that you're about to bring into the centre of your life, and that is truly exciting. Don't underestimate how much you can inspire other people with your flair and artistry and talent. That's important as well. So it's not just how we dress, how we think about our appearance, maybe giving our wardrobe something of a freshening up, perhaps decluttering some things that aren't really being used, create some more energy in your home. All of those things would be really good things. But in terms of creativity or entrepreneurship, this could be a really hot time to experiment and do something different. Now, clearly, because Venus inverts back again into Pisces, it's possible that whatever you do try might not necessarily stay on the exact course that you first anticipate will unfold. But prepare yourself for that. That's what retrogrades do. But by the end of the process, when we have that fantastic link between Venus and Jupiter in early June, I feel that you will be enriched with a lot more insights to how you can move forwards with your talents in whichever way you want to express them. Now, we know, of course, that Venus can be about relationships, and Venus in the first house could, even if you're in a pretty good relationship, just encourage you to protect your own space a little bit more. We can all get caught up with the demands of everyday life, which at times can be very stressful. You know, we have all these labour-saving devices and technology, but no one seems to have 2 minutes to themselves anymore. So one of the other things you could do with Venus in your own sign is just be a bit more assertive about saying what you need for you, and whether that is around your interests, whether it is around a hobby, whether it is spending a bit more time with your friends, or you do want to develop a new idea outside the normal structure of your life, then be open to it. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. That could be very healthy to say a bit more about, look, this is what I need for me. But in terms of relationships, if you have gone through a bit of an upsetting time recently with Venus applying to Saturn, and around about 2 weeks ago, and things haven't been easy, and there has been an ending, you could at the moment feel a bit split. Part of you could feel a sense of relief. Another part of you could be very sad. You know, there may be some dual emotions going on. There could be some confusion because of Neptune being so close. but also you may feel that you're being drawn towards a particular approach, and that's because of Pluto in your 11th house. So that's asking you to think that even if you have feelings for someone, even if it's been very difficult to perhaps create some space between you, or even take a bit of a temporary break, if you're trying to make it to understand exactly what your future really needs to be, again, don't judge yourself for it. But for some people who haven't been seeing anyone for quite a long time, this could be a chance to reinvigorate not just your love life, but your social life. And that's the great thing about Venus in your sign. It can give you the feist to go for what you need for you. But I feel because of that collective in Aquarius, it may feel safer doing it through some kind of shared interest hobby, going out with a group of friends that you feel comfortable with. And that's a great way just to bring a bit more sparkle to your connections to others. Now, because of the retrograde, just prepare yourself, as I mentioned before, that not everything you start now in this first 26 days may necessarily go forwards for the longer term. And as long as you're aware of that, you can just be conscious of not getting perhaps too invested. It's good to keep your options open a little bit and just give yourself a little bit of permission to focus on what you need to do for you immediately now. That's not selfish, it's protective. But there is a sense of excitement around you at the present time. And the other thing I'd say to you is, if you are someone who is interested in meeting people, more than one person could beat a path to your door by the early summer, as far as the Northern Hemisphere is concerned, and by the early winter as far as the south. Taurus, Venus moving into your 12th house is really quite sensitive. The 12th house for Venus can be where we deeply reflect. So the initial journey through the sign of Aries could see you thinking carefully about your connection to someone and involvement. It may even see you thinking very deeply about someone you're not with, and maybe how you could get to know them better, because the 12th house can be to do with mysteries. It could be to do with a secret relationship, but it can be to do, to be honest, with endings. But of course the plot thickens with the retrograde, and maybe is that even if you're thinking that a relationship has run its course, it might not have quite run its course as much as you may think, and the relationship may not be a romantic one. So April's going to be the testing ground, really, with Venus in that application again for the second and third times with Saturn, because Saturn over the last couple of years has really perhaps seen you realise who is truly for you and who isn't, particularly around your friendship group, your social world, or if you've been in a relationship, whether someone was in it for the long term or for them it was something more frivolous, which may or may not have been what you wanted. So there is some big stuff going on. But then once Venus inverts back into Pisces, the potential for something to reignite is very, very strong. And then it's going to be tested again. So this is going to be a really interesting period of time for you. And to be honest, Venus being your ruler, what you could do is just boil it down to the core principles of your sign, which is, does it resonate with your values? Does it feel right? Do you feel that you can connect to someone in a way which has some potential for stability? You have some kind of simpatico on your values. You feel safe and comfortable with them. You know, there is a natural, easy atmosphere to it. But just be aware that in any situation, whether it's professionally or in terms of your social world, the potential for some dishonesty and perhaps some lack of sincerity is quite strong with Venus in Aries, but especially once the retrograde begins. So just brace yourself for that. But once you come out of this whole process and Venus moves into your sign in early June, I think you're going to be so much more aware of who you can really trust and rely upon. And even if it is a little bit bruising, I feel it will, in a way, be very seminal, because I feel it may be the time to let go of something that perhaps you've almost been working too hard to sustain, because there's part of you that doesn't want to give in. Yes, you can be very determined, but also because you want to preserve what you see as the goodness in a situation, which is a great quality. But sometimes just trying to make a relationship work can become almost an addiction in itself. If the same patterns of discontent keep being repeated and you're not actually relating, just trying to solve the issues, that's something to become conscious of. And at times it's good to check out of something that no longer serves our greater good. So whether it's a lifestyle approach you have, an interest, a habit, a job, or a relationship, you're being asked to think carefully about whether your connection or validation of that is truly worthy of you. And that's the big thing that you need to work out over these next 84 days. So Gemini, Venus in Aries for you is a fabulous opportunity to celebrate the things you have in common with a partner or your friends or the people you socialize with, because the 11th house is very much about the collective, and that's what the sign of Aries is about. So you may find yourself taking the initiative, particularly in the first 26 days, of reaching out to people, and the more the merrier. But of course that old maxim is also true, the amount of quality over quantity, and that is something that maybe the retrograde will start to instigate within you, particularly when Venus then inverts back into Pisces, because then it may be around your professional world that there could be the potential to showcase your creativity or your imagination in quite a profound way. And you could find that something from the past, in terms of some talent you have or some approach or perhaps an old contact, could come back into your world in a really powerful but very providential way. But it is easy in any long-term relationship to get a little bit more focused on the things that irritate us. And that's where that 11th house energy is so good with Venus. And yeah, for all of us, it's a useful thing for us all to remind ourselves that we can focus on the differences, let's celebrate the commonalities. But also Venus in Aries can be super sociable. So it's a chance, particularly if you've been very caught up with work. And to be honest, you know, Saturn being in your work sector for the last couple of years means that there probably has been a lot of demands. It doesn't mean to say you won't have enjoyed them. It may have been that you've taken on more responsibility. Your leadership qualities have come much more to the fore, but at times it may have been more difficult to have a break, or it may be that some professional relationships haven't quite been as hunky-dory as they could do. So with your ruler Mercury in your sister air sign of Aquarius, linking with Jupiter in your sign, a fantastic chance to try to get the communication going in a better and clearer way. So even if you do find someone you work with challenging, difficult, demanding, in any way, the chance to try to develop a little bit more cooperation, very 11th house, is something to really seize. But once Venus goes retrograde, of course, the thing that may become more obvious to you is the people that you may have socialized with, you may have connected with, you may have given someone a little bit of a break, but they could then disappoint you. Or your future hopes for an existing relationship, the 11th house, might not come to pass as much as you would like. Or it may be that some other demands start to come into the mix with Venus back in the sign of Pisces, and they could be professional demands. So in April, don't be surprised if your worldly pressures do step up quite significantly. You may have had a taste of that a couple of weeks ago, and I think it can be true for the whole of April, but particularly on the 7th or the 25th. And in extreme circumstances, it's possible that you might want to leave an organisation where you don't feel it is very collaborative. It's not very friendly. It is very much based on just doing the role. You feel a little bit like you're just a number. It's not very personal. And that's really the story of what this particular Venus transition is going to be about. It could be very jolly, very bubbly, and fun to begin with, but also, particularly as it begins, you do have Uranus and the Moon in the 12th house, both forging awkward links to the 9th house. Some stuff could come up. Maybe some gossip can creep out. Maybe something that you've told someone in confidence. Maybe someone won't be quite as sealed in with that as they could be. Or maybe it's you who's tempted to be a little bit more provocative in the way you tease some information into the open. But once Venus gets to the end of its journey in the sign of Aries, once it revisits, it is going to forge that delicious link with Jupiter in your sign. And even if you do go on a little bit of a journey through your connections to others, and maybe certain connections could come to a close, particularly professionally, it may be the strength of your relationships with other people that serve up another quite brilliant opportunity for you right at the start of June. So Cancer, there's going to be a big shift this year. It's not necessarily for the whole of the year. We're going to see Neptune at the end of March move into the sign of Aries, but we also see an Aries solar eclipse at that point, and then Saturn joins up with Neptune on the 26th of May. The reason why that's significant for you is because you're an executive sign. You may not see yourself as that, but you are one of the cardinal signs, so very much a leader, but you don't necessarily go about your business in a very obvious way, and that can make you all the more effective. But some kind of extra responsibility or recognition could be heading your way later this year, and it just depends whether that's really what you want. But if it is, it could be very exciting. And Venus moving into Aries can be the first part of the process, in that you can start to build the relationships that could be important to some kind of big outcome that develops later for you. But of course, we have had the big connection between Venus and Saturn in Pisces a couple of weeks ago, and it's going to be repeated through this transition, not least in April. And that's the 9th house, and that's contracts, and Venus can be about money, and Saturn can be about harsh demands, or it can be about limitations, and it can also be about your need for freedom. Saturn's no respecter of freedom. It's saying, look, you have to put that need to one side. There is this expectation. You have to be very redoubtable in the face of any demands. But it could be, particularly if you're a very creative person, that did trigger within you a couple of weeks ago a big existential question. Do I really want to be doing this job that I am doing that isn't as creative and fulfilling as I would like? Or, because Saturn can be about property, do I like where I live? Is the aesthetics of that home quite as I want? The 10th house, where Venus moves to now, can be about property, but it can also be about professional interaction. But your skills, and this is where the executive bit comes in, of building good alliances, because you're not usually confrontational. You usually like to work with people in a very nurturing way, and those qualities could be what someone's looking for. So if you're looking for a new start in your career, it could be coming over the rest of this year, to be honest, and this can be part of the process. But you know, it can be the converse, something you're already in, which maybe does have some kudos attached to it could start to lose its luster, because Venus is about creativity. So it also depends on the people you're working with. If professional relationships are not particularly pleasant, once Venus goes retrograde and then rewinds back into the sign of Virgo, you'll be thinking carefully about whether the values that they have fit your values. So there could be a big shift around where you live, property, or around your work, and Venus moving into Aries can be the start of the process. Now, in terms of relationships, Venus moving into the 10th house can, in a very constructive relationship, see us want to take the next step towards some kind of more traditional commitment. Maybe moving in, maybe getting a property together, maybe even having some kind of ceremony to celebrate the relationship. So all of that's possible, but equally the 10th house can be the parents. And it can, therefore, with once Saturn moves at the 26th of May, you may have a parent or a line manager that just seems to be difficult to deal with. So you're given an opportunity to think about who you might connect to or where you might connect, but there could be some kind of extra obligation and responsibility that comes through it. And maybe also you're going to encounter someone who has a preconceived expectation of the way you should behave in a particular environment, and that expectation could be much more traditional. And if you're a natural bohemian, that might start to grind on your gears quite a lot. And I think the retrograde could be when a relationship actually starts to break down a little bit. And because all through April there are some real testing energies there, really going to ask you some questions about whether you're as in as maybe you thought you might be at the start of the process. So Leo, Venus moving into your sister fire sign of Aries has a number of different potentials. Immediately, because of the conjunction we've had between Venus, Neptune and the North Node, if there is someone that's really been mesmerising you of late, the 9th house can be where you're going to discover a little bit more of what they're truly about, because the 9th house can be about truth. But also it can be about freedom. If a relationship has been so tricky that you're wanting to spend some time alone or break free fully, the fact that Venus combined with Saturn a couple of weeks ago suggests that even if it's only a temporary thing, you may just need to go off and do your own thing. But in a very positive way, Venus moving into the sign of Aries could give you the push to book some kind of travel plan, particularly if it takes you to somewhere that really is very enlightening in some ways, perhaps educationally. So it could be a weekend away to study, it may be a city break, it could be somewhere where you can get much more in touch with the culture or the history of that place, which can be just as pleasing as much as enjoying some nice food and some sunshine or snow. But also, as Venus moves forwards, it is giving you the opportunity to explore some new dimensions. And if you are single, one of the best ways to do that with Venus in the 9th house is actually to be open-minded about who you could connect to. And the chances are you could encounter people, whether it's professionally, just socially, or potentially romantically, who are very different to you. But there is, in many Leos, an innately conservative streak. So Venus in Aries pushes you in some ways to confront any side of yourself where you're thinking about relationships or who might be suitable for you is challenged, because someone from a completely different cultural background might actually have a lot of qualities that could be really good for you, even if it does mean in some ways a shift or a change. Now obviously Venus does initially forge a very powerful alliance to Pluto, and that's going to be repeated a further 2 times through this whole process up to the early part of June. So I feel that a craving for a connection to someone where there is a higher purpose could be the backdrop energy for this whole transit. And of course, because Venus then goes into a retrograde, if you do then find out once you start engaging with someone, or if you are trying to understand where someone's really coming from, that they haven't quite been as truthful, as honest as they might be, or their philosophies don't merge with yours, as we go through April, that can be a crunch month for any relationship. It may be around shared finance, it may be a lack of close intimacy. Whatever you feel you're not quite getting from the other side can really be amplified through April. But then you have an opportunity towards the end of this whole process to celebrate something, with Venus forging such a beautiful link to Jupiter. And Jupiter, of course, has now gone direct in the part of your chart to do with your future and your social situation. And as this event occurs, Jupiter is linking brilliantly to Mercury, like Pluto, in your sector of relating. So don't underestimate that there can be extra possibilities for all sorts of connections if you widen your social sphere, your interest, spend more time with other people, see where it leads you. But that may require you to have a little bit more of an independent or fresh or a more open mind about who you can connect to, the type of people you can connect to, or teasing out what you really want from an existing relationship if you're not quite getting your needs met. Virgo, because of the collective between Venus, Neptune and the North Node, particularly if you've got planets right at the end of Virgo, there may have been something quite mesmeric that's just taken place. You may still be really intrigued by the way someone is. But also, because Venus moving into Aries is about deep commitment, if that magical connection is going to shape up, you're probably going to find out relatively soon, because even if you do want to show that level of devotion and it gets very intense, perhaps even very intimate, very, very quickly, there could be some questions asked again, to be really honest, when Venus retreats back into the sign of Pisces and then connects to Saturn all through the month of April within 3 degrees, but repeats the conjunction of a couple of weeks ago twice that month. So if you're embarking on something that's new, exciting and very sensuous, just be aware that there could still be some stuff that you don't quite know about the other person. I'm not trying to provoke an agenda of fear. I don't believe in doing that. We just got to look at the astrology. Neptune can be mystical, but it can also be deceptive. But equally, you may have had a genuine connection with someone, and it is going to be very powerful indeed. And if so, you could find yourself particularly loved up over the next month. That said, of course, the 8th house can also be about long-term finance, and Venus can be about money. But the 8th house can also be about shared finance. You may find, if you're in a longer-term relationship which is stable, that your partner could benefit from some kind of legacy, inheritance, insurance payout, or pension, or an insurance claim over the next 4 weeks, which could be really delightful. So Libra, for you, Venus moving into your 7th house is really fascinating because, of course, it's your opposite sign of Aries, but maybe it's going to push you to be a bit more proactive. Now, whenever I say that Libran people are good at getting on with people, I always get loads of comments from Libran people saying, that's not true. I've got a clear idea of who I will get on with or not, and I'm not a people pleaser. So I apologise if I've spoken out of turn, but I feel that the nuance is that Libran people can be quite good at understanding what other people might want, and whether they're going to meet that need or not is another matter. So that's the insight that Librans can have. But Venus being on your 7th house cusp is, to be honest, as good as it can get. And people who have Venus on the 7th house generally do have quite harmonious relationships. The downside is that at times they can give away their personal identity a little bit in order to keep the peace. The great thing about having Venus in Aries is that's much less likely to happen because it can be feisty. So if there is somebody that you want to collaborate with, again, doesn't have to be romantic. You've got a great window for this first 26 days of building up the goodwill. However, because of the retrograde then going back into the 6th house, connecting all through April with the steely, cold, detached, remote, scrutinizing, difficult energies of Saturn, you could find that however much you try to understand the other person, however skilled you are at that, or if you meet someone new, it's possible that once the retrograde really kicks in, that you start to see things that actually are not so good, and that could start to create some disappointment. So how do you deal with that? Well, I feel the trick of life for us all around relationships is having a good understanding of what we need, what we're prepared to give, what we're prepared to flex on a bit, because some things are red lines where, you know, we feel very strongly. Other things we may be a little easier going on. And the next part of relating is having an understanding that someone else may want something from us, and being aware of that and prepared to lean into that, because a lot of people aren't very good at that. I'm not talking about Librans, just people. People can be profoundly good at seeing what they need for themselves, not necessarily understanding the give and take of relationships. So I feel that whether it is professionally, whether it is with a friend, a neighbour, a family member, or it is in a romantic context, if the next month is really good, that's great. Enjoy the moment, but there could be a test in April. And that test in April could be a test of tolerance. Your tolerance, their tolerance. If you're someone, particularly at work, who tends to have a role which does require a lot of commitment and a lot of giving, perhaps around healthcare, service industry, and there isn't an awful lot of recognition and acknowledgement of your effort, that could really stick in your craw through April. Maybe nothing to do with a romantic relationship at all. So relationships can work in lots of different ways, but initially there's a great opportunity to bring something better, more harmonious and pleasing into your world in this next month, but it's sure enough going to get tested, if that's so, in April. So Scorpio, Venus moves into your 6th house. The 6th house is the sector of domesticity. It's of practicality. It's of good deeds, conscientiousness, reliability. It's all those kind of unsexy things. Who is conscientious at home, for example, who's thoughtful enough around small but important gestures. Those things can really help harmony. But if there was a little bit of a crunch point in a romantic relationship, or even with an offspring a couple of weeks ago, trying to engender greater goodwill through those practical things that we can all do to help each other is a great way to rev up a relationship and make it more convivial. Then again, if you are single, there is the chance that you could get to know someone in an extremely practical location over the next few weeks. But even if you do, ultimately it does come down to things like attraction, suitability, availability, ease of getting to know each other and all that kind of stuff. And April could raise some more questions in a way that you experienced a couple of weeks ago. But for now, you are being asked to be a bit more thoughtful and sacrificing, or if you're very good at that, you're going to expect that from your other side. So whether it is a colleague, someone you house share with, or it is a partner. So Sagittarius, Venus moving into the sign of Aries is delicious. It's glamorous, it's fun, it's very sociable, it's affectionate. So for these first 26 days, expect a real glow up, a real warmth around all sorts of interactions. If you are a playful archer, that chance to be a little bit more flirty and interactive can present itself. Because Saturn has been making life rather tough at times over the last couple of years, Uranus has made it rather chaotic around practicalities. I think you're deserving of an interlude and doing something that is some light relief. So whether it's getting together with some friends, if you have children, their pursuits and interests can also be something that you're going to want to really get behind and encourage. But if you are someone who, doesn't feel that you get enough opportunity to express yourself, whatever talents you've got, know that they can absolutely be burnished by the warmth, the fire of your sister fire sign of Aries hosting the lovely Venus. Now, the retrograde could mean, particularly if you meet someone and it's very sort of based on attraction, sexual attraction, and then with the retrograde and Venus returns to Pisces and crunches or gets crunched by Saturn through April, that could be a test, because essentially what Saturn's been letting you know over the last couple of years is however much you've enjoyed wandering, being independent, your love of knowledge, your great sense of humour, your upbeat positivity, there has been part of you that at times has been neglected. That's your feeling side. Saturn's asking you to get more comfortable with it. And that part of a relationship is important, particularly in an existing tie. So through April, that could be a pivotal time for you, particularly if you're house hunting with a partner. 4th house, Saturn, Venus. You want just the right kind of abode, the right vibe, the right aesthetics, very Venusian. But it also could be a time that if a relationship isn't quite as you need emotionally, it could be tested. So if you do meet someone over the next 26 days and it is full on flirty, just be aware that that stuff that Saturn's been asking you to grapple with that isn't very easy the last couple of years is going to be important. And you do need to show it in a way because it's all part of you. We all have parts of us that are, more challenged by life. Whether it's our history, our experiences, our responses are not always as neat and tidy as we might like. And therefore, what Saturn applying to Venus can do in the 4th house is bring a real dose of reality to even the most playful, charismatic connection. So Capricorn, Venus moving into the sign of Aries could engender within you a desire to affect your environment in some kind of way which makes it more pleasing to the senses. Now for some people that could be going somewhere in nature. The 4th house is very much about nature. If you have a particular love of the sea, of rivers, of lakes, somewhere that's very peaceful, a park, it could be that your thing is about just being very quiet at home, maybe working on a creative hobby. But equally, for some Capricorns, Venus going through the 4th house could be a push to declutter your home and create some more space, but at the same time redecorate or remodel it in some kind of way. Some Capricorn people may even look to replace some furnishings or get some new soft furnishings, put some nice pictures up. Just change things around, because that's all about your immediate environs, but equally it can be about where you step out into the world and immerse yourself in an environment. But Venus is about relationships. The 4th house can be about the family. And if there have been some strains, particularly with a sibling or some neighbours a couple of weeks ago, wouldn't be a complete surprise. You may want to try and get things on a better footing. The challenge perhaps could be April, because when Venus inverts back into Pisces, that area which for you is very much about your immediate world, that's where Saturn's been bringing a cooler wind over the last couple of years. And 2 weeks ago, Venus combined with Saturn, and even if accidentally you may have had a discussion with someone where they may have taken the wrong, got the wrong end of your proverbial stick, or perhaps you of theirs, or a text message jolted you a little bit, didn't seem quite as diplomatic as it could be. And there is the potential for that again in April. Unfortunately, two exact contacts, the 7th and the 25th, Venus applying to your ruler Saturn. So Saturn is in some ways a very misunderstood planet, I feel, particularly on YouTube. Saturn can bring rewards. You know, if you've worked on something such as a website, if you keep beavering away, it could be in April you're going to get to what you really want. Perhaps you have your own blog, perhaps you're someone who works hard in your community for the common good. That application, that industry, Saturn, linked with your people skills and relating skills, Venus, could provide a dividend. But of course there's always different spectrums to how planets can impact us. So I feel that words will need care in April, to be honest. But the big picture through to the start of June, where there's going to be the potential for a gloriously social time for you, I feel through to then, working at your emotional relationships, the atmospherics of where you live, or managing your time to get yourself in positions where you feel there's a healingness around your atmosphere is very important indeed. You know, when you watch these shows where they buy properties and they do them up, or people are, you know, do they love it or leave it? We love those kind of programs. And often a property might be a bit dated, but you can feel the atmosphere there. Or there might be one that's all glitzy that just does absolutely nothing for us. It's the same if we look at property websites. You can look at properties that are very valuable that just seem utterly soulless. And another one, which may be more humble, has got a flooding of light. And you just think, wow, that would be lovely to live there. And I do this and I do that and I do the other. So just being aware of the atmospherics is going to be important for you around all sorts of relationships. And if you are someone who tends to be maybe a little bit wary about opening up about your feelings, Venus in the 4th house initially is asking you to be a little bit more daring, which is what the sign of Aries is about in terms of sharing that emotion. Aquarius. Venus moving into Aries is the first of several exciting developments that are going to unfold this year. At the end of March, we have that final solar eclipse in Aries. Again, like Venus, triggering the 3rd house, quick communications. But also Neptune moving into Aries too. Your imagination in the way you convey your ideas is going to be turned up to an even higher level. Then we have Saturn, your traditional ruler, moving on to the 3rd house cusp at the latter part of May, the 26th. The key is the root of Pluto in your sign for the long term, angling very providentially to Neptune, to Saturn, and initially to Venus. And as I mentioned in the introduction, Venus is forging 3 connections to Pluto. Very powerful indeed. So relationships for you can be transformed, but not necessarily just of a romantic kind. It could be online. You know, there may be people you're getting to know that you realise have more depth to them than you previously knew. And it could be through social media. We all know that social media is a platform that can create envy, jealousy, exclusion, and of course information can also be presented in a way to steer our perceptions, and that's not good. But it can be where we make really nice connections to people. It could be in your local community. The 3rd house is the neighbourhood. It's where we meet people or see people on a regular basis. And your personality is going to glow up, particularly for the first 26 days. Once Venus inverts and goes back into Pisces, some of the financial challenges that Saturn has provided for Aquarius people could come up again through April, but also it could be where you can start to see how far you've come in addressing some of the tensions that Saturn has created by flexing and bring in new ways or new approaches to how you earn money. Maybe they like to call it a side hustle these days, don't they? Sideline, part-time role, something we do for ourselves, maybe a hobby that can be converted into some kind of earning. So I feel that, yeah, April could show up a situation where your values are starkly different from someone else's. If, for example, you get to know someone in a bubbly way and then find out that they're a bit mean and not very generous, they don't have the open-heartedness and awareness of the sort of community that Aquarius people do, that's something that you could find yourself maybe wanted to separate from someone who in the past you may have been on reasonable terms with. You might not even want to fall out. Then again, in a romantic context, Venus and Saturn in a conjunction can be tough. And if money is short, that can create a lot of strain in even the best relationships. So April could be testing, but Venus going back into the second house also could remind you that the conversations you had with Venus in Aries could remind you of something from your past that could be remodeled to do with your experiences, your knowledge, something you used to do or someone you used to know, and that could bring in a financial opportunity by looking at it in a fresh light. So we mustn't see retrogrades as only being delays, problems. They can help us to look again in a fresh way at our values, Venus in Pisces, at our self-worth, Venus in Pisces, at our generosity to others, Venus in Pisces, at our diet, Venus in Pisces. If we're not eating and drinking quite as sensibly as we could, then certainly Saturn in Pisces has been asking us to be more self-disciplined over the last couple of years. But I feel generally the trend, particularly with the solar eclipse at the end of March, Neptune, Saturn, and then Uranus from the 7th of July, is super positive for Aquarius people. And even if you do encounter some maybe gossipy people with Venus in the third house, once it goes into retrograde, someone who may be a bit insincere, maybe it is someone you have to work with who, you know is a bit superficial. That's possible with Venus in the third house. But remember, Venus in Aries is about action. If there's someone you want to connect to, you take the initiative. So, Pisces, for you, this is quite an intriguing development. I can tell you that over the next 26 days, your finances could improve in a way that you're not expecting. The danger is that you could be a little bit too free and easy with spending it. You won't want to let it burn the proverbial hole in your pocket, particularly once the retrograde begins. The other thing is that if you did decide that you were going to adhere to a diet at the turn of the year with your New Year's resolutions, that's going to be seriously challenged by Venus in Aries, which is a much more impulsive energy. If there is something that calls out to you in terms of a big ticket item, that could be a draw. But Venus in Aries can work in a very aesthetic way. If you're someone who loves home cooked food or growing your own stuff, you might find with Venus in Aries that you want to get an allotment or cultivate a part of your garden, or if space is tight, put a window box on a windowsill and just get a few things growing, which would give you a lot of enrichment. But also, Venus in the second house could see you thinking carefully about your values and your self-worth. And it's a good time, particularly when the retrograde begins in Aries, to reassess things, to re-examine things, because for all of us, life is a constantly moving puzzle that we have to try to keep in balance. It's constantly challenging us, I feel. So there may be an opportunity here to look at something afresh. But once Venus returns to your sign, if you are a creative and you do try something to earn extra money, it doesn't quite work out, don't give up, because by the time Venus makes its way into Taurus in early June, remember you're going to have that fantastic link with Jupiter. And you know, it could be around a property or something to do with working from home or selling off things that no longer are important to you, perhaps things that have been in your family a long time. If you can get beyond the sentimentality, there may be some quite valuable things that you no longer really need, and you may want to make your life a bit more aesthetic, a bit more simple. But Venus in the second house can go in either direction of the spectrum. It can give us a desire for luxury, calorific goodies, splashing out on anything that sparkles, or it can be where we're perfectly happy getting the bargain in a charity shop. It just depends on the type of person you are and where you are in your life journey. But if you do meet someone and it is romantic over the next 26 days particularly, it could be seriously sensual. But food and wine could be the communion that blesses the relationship to begin with. But of course, when Venus inverts back into your sign, connects to Saturn all through April, if you feel crowded in, or someone, as you get to know them, isn't quite as alluring and attractive and sensual as you first thought, it could make you think again. But if you're prepared to really stick in there and get to know someone better, and it is the right person for you, it feels right, you have similar values. I actually feel values are not having similar opinions. They're not necessarily coming from a similar background. Values are things like decency, good manners, being caring, thoughtfulness, those kind of things. If they're in common, you could really bond in with someone through to the early part of June, even if it's not a completely straight line of getting to know each other a lot more. It's been a real pleasure being with you. Thank you so much for joining me for this Venus in Aries retrograde special. If you've yet to watch your February deep dive forecast for each of the 12 signs, please see the links beneath this video. And also, if you've yet to check out my new website, please go to www.patrickarundell.com. Thank you so much, take care, and all the best.